Tom Jordan and Kevin Deitz are All Talk. 760 WJR.
You know, the phrase "get things done" was mentioned a number of times in Governor Whitmer's State of the State last night, but for much of the past couple of years, a long time, not a lot was getting done on the state level. And Senate Majority Leader Mike Shirkey was publicly frustrated while he watched as the governor made and implemented a lot of her own decisions, particularly when it came to COVID and lockdown, stay home, stay safe, mask up. That did change, Kevin, about mid-2021, and things did start getting done. It's amazing, really, when you think about what can get done when people just start working together.
Yeah, Tom, you remember the Eminem song, Slim Shady? In the song, he asked, "Will the real Slim Shady please stand up?"
Yeah.
That song jumped into my head last night as I watched the governor talk about the need for kids to be in school for face-to-face learning, the need to reduce taxes, to work in a bipartisan manner. It was great. It was all the stuff I wanted to hear. I really did, and I'm glad that I heard it. But it doesn't feel like that was the governor from a year or two ago when there were lockdowns of small businesses and kids were learning at home. And it's like a transformation. But here to talk about the governor's State of the State last night is Mike Shirkey, Michigan Senate Majority Leader. Good morning. How are you, Mike?
Hey, Kevin. Nice to talk with you again. And Tom, this is the first time we've had a chance to interact.
Yeah, it's good to interact with you, Mr. Shirkey. It's a real pleasure.
Yeah, happy New Year. What was your thoughts as you watched the governor last night?
I thought it was a prototypical and predictable campaign year State of the State. There are a number of things in her list of priorities that I believe we can actually make some progress on, but there's still some very big remaining questions that deserve more attention than just lip service. For instance, 95% or more of the schools in Michigan have been working very hard over the last, since the school season started, to make sure that they're in seat. But there's a small percentage of school districts who are still refused to, open up and give it the old college try. And in fact, some of those school districts are the ones that receive the most federal money and federal assistance, and yet they're still closed down. And I had hoped that the governor would put a more passionate pitch to those and just explaining that there's no reason. Everybody else is doing it. Doesn't mean it's smooth. There are times, even when schools that already have students in seats, that they have to have temporary shutdown or a day off because, frankly, some of the staff, they don't have enough staff. But they are trying, and they're doing their best to do so, and we've got got this small cohort of schools that are not doing that, and I think it's time that we, pressured them to do so. Her conversations and her talks about behavioral health is something that we've been talking about in the Michigan Senate for 3 years now, and I believe that we can find some common ground there. I'm not too interested in selective tax reductions and tax relief. If we're going to do tax relief, we're going to do it broad-based across the entirety of taxpayers. So those are some examples of areas where legitimate conversations and, I believe, outcomes can occur, but it requires more than just talking about it.
Did she say anything last night that she can be held accountable to? And I'm thinking when she was talking about all of the money that came in from the feds and the need to fix our infrastructure, can we hold her up to say, look, at the State of the State, you said this, where is it?
There are a number of bills. There's been over 100. Excuse me, I'm going to correct that. There's been just shy of 100 bipartisan bills, very bipartisan bills, sent to her in this past year and a half or two that have been vetoed by her. Not the least of which is some very important ones for education, and even some related to infrastructure. So. Again, we need to see the actions line up with the narrative and the rhetoric, I'm going to hold out some hope that we've gotten behind some of this stuff, and if she's serious about behavioral health and if she's serious about tax relief, by golly, we can do that.
Well, I want to go back to education because I think that is directly tied to the mental health crisis we're seeing in kids. The state did receive billions of dollars, this record school funding to get kids back in the classroom. And you agree on this, that they should be there. Not everyone does, though, and I'm going to highlight Flint. I know Detroit's doing it right now as well, but Flint's getting national attention on this because they've decided to return to virtual learning indefinitely because of the clear consequences of that decision. It didn't work in 2020 and 2021, and they received $50,000 a student to stay open. And they're not the only school doing this, but I got to ask, I mean, there seems to be very few legitimate excuses for them to do this. Are there any built-in standards of accountability when they get this kind of money that they need to keep those classrooms open for students to come into the school?
They should have to stand up and answer the question if most of the school districts around the state are doing it, why aren't they? And the parents in that area should be standing up and clamoring for getting our students back in the seats. And you properly identify they're one of the few that have still resisted, going back to as close to normalcy as possible. And it's a very important decision and position that the locals need to rise up and, demand at least either changing the direction or providing answers for why they continue to assume that position.
Doesn't make sense to me because even the NIH says that consequences and the effects of these lockdowns on mental illness will persist for years to come, even after the quarantines are lifted. So I don't know why they don't put them back. These kids are the most affected, and they're least affected by COVID. I want to ask you this, though. You work with the governor of Lott. You've known her for a very long time, and we see these different versions of her that Kevin spoke of at the top of this segment. The working across the aisle type that we saw in 2018 when she was running the first time. And then last night, her bipartisan kind of error that she was putting across. But then there's also the other side, the stay inside your homes restrictive type from 2020 and 21. Which version do you think is the most authentic version of Governor Gretchen Whitmer?
We've had an interesting experiment going on in Michigan. If you compare the early stages of her position of, coming out weekly press conferences with mandates and dictates, closing up everything in sight and causing people to stay home and, just wreaking havoc, not just on our economy, but also on our livelihoods. And we had, record levels of infections and record levels of hospitalizations. And then most recently, where she's been backing off on that, and there still have been, frankly, statistically no difference in the outcomes. And there's a proof that the shutdowns and the overreaching of government didn't work. And even the NIH now, as you identified, is supporting the notion that the net result of that overreach of government and locking people down and inhibiting their livelihoods and putting their jobs in jeopardy and keeping kids out of school, all of that, the outcomes of that are far worse than what they were trying to accomplish. And so I think Michigan is a great example of why it didn't work. We're seeing it right before our very eyes, and I'm glad that she's at least not reverting back to that position.
Last night, the governor said she helped small businesses retain over 200,000 jobs with $420 million in COVID relief. Is small business in Michigan happy with the job the governor did through the pandemic?
Oh, I think you should ask the Small Business Association, but I'm a small business owner. And I can tell you that there's no passing grade from that perspective. We have the governor touts Michigan's low unemployment, but that is not a complete picture. We have one of the lowest job participation rates in the nation. That low unemployment, if everybody that's not participating in the labor market were to be asking for unemployment, we'd find it to be a whole lot different. And that's a direct result of the federal government, churning out too much money and making it, frankly, too attractive to not have to participate in the workforce. And so I think one of the most important things for us to do beyond mental health in education is to encourage, I don't know a single business, not a single business that doesn't have unfilled openings. So we have to address this lack of participation in the workforce and get people out, and that will jumpstart our economy in ways in which we really need.
Yeah, staffing shortage is one of the many crises we're seeing in our state and our country. Senate Majority Leader Mike Shirkey, it's a pleasure to talk with you. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Thank you, guys. Have a great day.